Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to be recording this video and bringing you a Detroit Pistons offseason preview. This video was heavily requested on my most recent offseason preview, which was my Houston Rockets one up on the channel. If you haven't watched that one, make sure to go check it out. And then also leave a comment down below what team you'd like to see next. The Pistons are the second team I'm recording an offseason preview for. The plan is to get through all 30 of them this year. Last year we covered a ton of them as well, so I'm very excited for this series to be continuing it. At some point these will become 2 upload a day type videos where a lot of work goes into it. For example, in this video, about 2.5 hours of non-recording time went into just preparing this video. Now I'll have to record, edit, and then ultimately publish as well, so a lot of work goes in. So if you guys do enjoy, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel as well, and let's jump into our video preview, where we're going to start with a 2022-2023 season recap, where we look at what this team just was, which I think is the most important step. If you're trying to figure out where a team needs to head to figure out how to win, become a better organization, better team, you have to see where they are and find the next steps for that organization. So that's where we're going to start with Detroit. Then we'll look at the head coaching change. Obviously, Dwayne Casey shifting roles within the organization. There's a video up on the channel that discusses that briefly from my co-creator Austin. He did a very good job covering that in his video, so I'd recommend checking that one out if you haven't seen it already. I'm sure a lot of you have though. 2023 NBA draft lottery odds. We'll talk about how that could impact the future of the Detroit Pistons. The NBA draft prospects that could be potential options for Detroit in both the first and second round this year. I've kind of been reluctant to do second round mock drafts before the end of the season. Those will be coming out on the channel at some point, but I want to highlight some guys that I think would be good fits for Detroit towards the top of the second round in this year's draft. We'll also visit their free agency situation, as well as some potential guys I would like them to sign in free agency, or at least explore signing. And then we'll go into an early outlook for next season. Again, there's a lot that can change between now and then. I think this offseason is going to be a very busy one across the NBA. So make sure you guys are subscribed so you don't miss out on all of that content that will be coming out. So, well, let's look at the Pistons this past year. Not a good team this past season. I'm sure Pistons fans, you watched a ton of games, probably even more than I did, even though I watch a ton of Pistons games, even though I'm not a Pistons fan myself. But you know I'm always pulling for you guys. The Pistons, by the way, you guys have probably some of the best fans and one of the best fan bases in general. The Pistons have not been a very good team for quite a while, and I know you guys are still big time diehards. I see it in the comment section, see it on Twitter all the time, so shout out to you. Let's get some Pistons hype in the chat right now as well. If you are a Pistons fan, I want to see it down in the comment section, and also smash that like button on other people's comments. Let's get some good Pistons community hype in our comment section here at Utility Sports. But this team was 17-65, which was 5 games worse than any other team in the NBA. But let's start with the big reason why. No Cade Cunningham, no good. The team, if you're going to miss your best player, it's going to be really, really tough, especially when your team is very young and relying heavily on young players, because just quite frankly, young players do not win in the NBA. I mentioned this in my Rockets offseason preview as well. Rookies, for the most part, never have a positive plus minus. I believe this year there's only 4 or 5 rookies with a positive plus minus from this past NBA draft. So it's just not likely you're going to win, especially when you're Detroit, who, you know, yes, you had those young talented players, but you don't really have a lot of infrastructure around them. And Troy Weaver's made a lot of moves in terms of adding in other young pieces. Project type players, did it a few years ago with Marvin Bagley, traded for James Wiseman this deadline. That's not going to set you up to win. Now, one move they made, we're going to skip ahead a little bit here, was to get Bojan Bogdanovic, who I do think was a big positive for this team and is an example of what I think the Detroit Pistons need more of. Not necessarily more Bojans, but more players around similar age range as Bojan with very good talent, skill sets, that once Cade Cunningham comes back, shakes off some of the rust that he's going to have going into next season, there's going to be opportunities for this team to significantly improve. And you know, a lot of teams typically can't jump up by 20 plus wins in a season. I'm not projecting that the Pistons will for sure do that, but I think there's an opportunity here for them to win 37, 38, maybe upwards of 40 games if they have a perfect offseason, which will break down how that could potentially happen. But one good thing about Cade Cunningham missing time this year was some of their other young guys had to play in roles that meant they had the ball more, had a little bit more responsibility, and I think that's good for their development. Jaden Ivey, I would have liked to see him have the ball even more. I think Dwayne Casey did fumble the bag with the way that he had Ivey play this year. I would have loved to see him be very ball dominant, honestly, progressing as an on-ball point guard. We didn't get to see that as much as I would have liked to see this year, but he did have a pretty nice season, over 16 points a game, over 5 assists a night, around 4.5 rebounds, and pretty similar efficiency numbers to the player who's going to win Rookie of the Year in Paolo Banchero out in Orlando. I think Ivey's kind of a sleeper for Rookie of the Year. Yeah, I know the Pistons didn't win nearly as many games as Orlando or Indiana, but at the same time, Jaden Ivey was playing with Killian Hayes as his starting backcourt, teammate. So that you have to take some of that into consideration. I think Jaden Ivey is going to be a lock to be first team all rookie, which is well deserved. And then Jalen Duren, a guy who I had 5th on my big board last year. I don't really know anyone that was higher on Jalen Duren than myself. And he was 2nd this year in double-doubles for rookies behind Walker Kessler, someone who I was very high on as well. But I still think Duren has a higher upside than Walker Kessler. Kessler showed what he is, which is a very good drop coverage, rim protector. He's going to block a ton of shots, and Will Hardy gave him the pathway to doing that this year. Jalen Duren has a lot of different potential pathways to being good in the NBA. I think offensively, there's still more that he can unlock and go to, specifically as a passer on short rolls, which Detroit didn't do a ton of this year with him, which I think was a missed opportunity for his development, giving him some of those reps now. But at the same time, I do think that Duren showed what he can do on the glass. I think that he also showcased that he can be a very switchable defender, which is why I thought Detroit was such a good landing spot for him, because they're a team that has wanted to switch in the past, but they also employed him in drop coverage. Sometimes they'd blitz at the level of the screen. Duren's very flexible and can do a lot of things, and I think when they're at their best, Duren's going to be a big part of their defensive assignments every single night. They have a lot of young talent, but they need more good veteran contributors. And then Killian Hayes, someone's got to say hasta la vista to this guy. He was last in the NBA among qualifying players in points per shot per Eduardo Vergani on Twitter. He does a very good job keeping track of some of this data and presents very unique data. And most teams look at points per possession as a good way to indicate, if you're running a good offense, bad offense, or if your defense is being successful. And pretty much every defense around the NBA would live with Killian Hayes shooting the basketball, because he ranked dead last in the NBA among qualifying players when it comes to efficiency, putting the ball in the hoop on volume. And he's just not a good basketball player at the NBA level. I've been saying this for years now. I gave that pick an F grade when they took him over Tyrese Halliburton. Now I know Pistons fans are going to say, well, we got Cade Cunningham because of that. That's revisionist history where, like with hindsight, yes, you did get Cade Cunningham a year later. That wasn't guaranteed when they took Killian Hayes. So it was a terrible selection at the time. Obviously things worked out differently and maybe in a beneficial way for Detroit, but it's not a good selection. Killian Hayes needs to be on a different team or in a different league, to be honest with you. I typically don't say stuff like that in videos, but Killian Hayes is one of the few players that should not be on an NBA roster, in my opinion, at this point. Which leads us into our next spot here, which is the coaching change. Dwayne Casey moves into a front office role, and I think that's a very important thing to note here. First of all, Dwayne Casey has found a lot of success in the past, specifically with his time in Toronto, where he was former NBA Coach of the Year at one point. Now in Detroit, it's been a different story. He's not had a winning season as the Pistons head coach, but you have to remember he inherited a whole bunch of crap from Stan Van Gundy, who did a terrible job running the team. Basically set their roster on fire, burned the team down at the stake, and traded everything and his mother basically for Blake Griffin, which was, again, a terrible move. Stan Van Gundy, I was shocked when he got another coaching job after Detroit. Luckily, they didn't give him the keys to the franchise like the Pistons did, because New Orleans is still somehow alive today, where Detroit is taking a few years to recover. So Dwayne Casey was not in a position to win a lot of games, obviously, with what he, kind of started that position with. But I do think at some points he could have done a better job. Winning 17 games this year, not a good look. I think that this team is more talented than that. Yes, they're young. Yes, it's hard to win with young players, but really 17 games, they should have won more. And I would make the same case last year and the year before. I think that he did what he tried his best. I don't want to make this a hate on Dwayne Casey moment, because I think Dwayne Casey moving to the front office role is a really good thing for this team because it points to me that they're hiring a first-time head coach, and I have a very good feeling about who it is. And I think it's Adrian Griffin, who's the Raptors assistant. Also, you see Charles Lee, who's a very good Bucks assistant. Chris Quinn, Josh Longstaff, Brian Keefe are some of the options that they're going to interview from the current sounds of things. But Adrian Griffin, who is an assistant for the Raptors, I know some Pistons fans might say, "Oh, we don't want another Raptors coach coming in." Adrian Griffin's a great option here. He's on the right side of the graphic, down at the bottom right, and I think he's going to be the next Pistons head coach, if I had to guess. First of all, Dwayne Casey, I think, has a very good relationship with the Raptors management and has a good understanding of what Adrian Griffin's going to bring to the table based on some of his own personal communication with Griffin's current bosses. And then secondly, about Adrian Griffin, I think that, as somebody who he formerly played in the NBA, found a good amount of success. He's actually AJ Griffin's father. We talked about him a little bit in the Houston Rockets offseason preview. Adrian Griffin, I think, is going to be a very strong, solid hire with a good background in assistant coaching that's going to set him up for success. Charles Lee, I would argue, has just as good of a resume when it comes to assistant coaching and his tenure in the NBA as somebody who knows what he's doing. I think those are the top two candidates, but Adrian Griffin's really the one I'm highlighting here as the guy who I think is going to actually get the position to be the next Pistons head coach. Again, I want to point out, first-time head coach. I'm very, very confident that Detroit is going to be hiring a first-time head coach this offseason, which leads us into the 2023 NBA Draft Lottery odds. And you see Detroit sits at the very top with the worst record in the NBA. They technically have the best odds, obviously tied with San Antonio and Houston for the best odds at number one, 14% chance. But they have no possibility of picking lower than 5, which this is a very good draft to have a top 5 pick in. They are guaranteed that. So, there's a very good possibility that they come out with a Victor Wembanyama in this draft. Again, 14% chance. That's the best odds you can have. If you're curious about the draft lottery, I do have a draft lottery explained video up on the channel within the last week. Go check that out. It's definitely worth the watch because it breaks down the process, the odds, how everything's going to work with the draft lottery. And if you're curious how your team might get Victor Wembanyama, well, this is really the way that it might play out, which leads us into potential draft picks. So with their own first round pick, obviously it's going to depend on where they fall in the lottery. I'm recording this prior to the lottery. So let's say they get the first overall pick. Victor Wembanyama goes there. You see the trio of him, Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham. You think, wow, that's awesome, right? They've got their core. Jalen Duren's kind of the perfect big to have next to Wembanyama because he puts some of the physical pressure on the rim. Wembanyama might like to play a little bit of outside and then inside afterward, kind of a backwards big in a way, based on what we had traditionally have seen in the NBA. Obviously, things have changed recently. So Wembanyama is going to be great. I think his rookie season, he'll average 25-ish points a game. I know people are going to say, oh, he's going to get injured, whatever. Okay. It's very possible any player could get injured. Obviously, Chet Holmgren doesn't help my case here, but you draft the talent. Victor Wembanyama is the best player in the draft. It's not even close. But Scoot Henderson last year would have been the first overall pick in last year's draft. And you guys know how much I love Jaden Ivey. And this is why I've got asterisks next to Scoot Henderson's name here on the graphic. You guys know I was number one, highest guy on YouTube on Jaden Ivey. I still love his game. I think the upside is immense with him. Scoot Henderson is just a better player. He's a better prospect than Jaden Ivey was. This is going to hurt me to say a little bit, but if you get pick number 2, you've really got two options, which is either trade down the pick down to number 3 and get extra additional assets for it. Otherwise, you flaunt to the team picking third that, hey, we're going to move the pick that's going to be Scoot Henderson to another team for future first-round picks and see if you can get them to bite while still getting a top-end prospect yourself. Or you just draft him and you trade Jaden Ivey. That's the other option. Scoot Henderson is that good that I don't think that you should pass on him unless you're getting a very good trade offer for that selection and something that helps really kind of increase your flexibility, increase your ability to continue to improve this team. So if I was picking second for Detroit, I would take Scoot Henderson unless I got blown away by a trade offer. And Brandon Miller's kind of the sweet spot. If the Pistons end up picking third, well, that's really the guy that I think makes the most sense for them in terms of roster fit outside of Wembanyama. Wembanyama is the best fit for them, clearly, because he's the best fit for everybody. Brandon Miller, out of the other options, is a very clean fit because he's a wing shooter, can play with the ball in his hands, can play without the ball in his hands. He's going to be able to space the floor for Cade, for Jaden. and also for Duren as well, which I think is important, keeping the floor spacing clean. I think Brandon Miller might have a little bit more of a disappointing rookie season than most people are expecting. Not that he's going to be a bad NBA player. I just don't think he's going to walk into the league and average 20 plus points a game. I think some people do expect that. Not a lot of people, but some. So, I think that Miller could be a nice piece for Detroit. He would fit in very well, probably averaging around 13 to 16 points a game as a rookie, especially playing off of Cade and Jaden. I think it's a really nice combination there. Amen Thompson, 4th overall. Again, this is another interesting spot where if you get to there, I don't really love that spot for Detroit. I think that they would probably explore trading that pick. Otherwise, Jarris Walker could become in play, or Ausar Thompson, who is a slightly better shooter than Amen. Now, in all of my mocks this year, Amen Thompson has gone before his twin brother, so I don't see it overly likely that Detroit would take him at 4. Jarris Walker is a little bit more of a realistic possibility at 4, but really, I think that the top 4 are clear in that order for Detroit. Then 5th would be Jarris Walker, and Cam Whitmore included on here because he would be a nice fit onto Detroit's roster after they trade Saddiq Bey, but he would likely come at pick 6 or later. And remember, it's a lock that they're in the top 5 in this year's draft. So then the very next round, 2nd round pick, there's some options that I've highlighted and headlined here as well for the Pistons that I think make a lot of sense. Baylor Shireman being one of them out of Creighton, former South Dakota State Jackrabbit, transferred to Creighton this past year, had a pretty nice tournament for himself, had an up and down season a little bit, but his pro comp is Joe Ingles. He's also a left-handed player who's not very reliant on athleticism, but he's very good as a kind of tertiary, secondary playmaker. That's what I expect him to kind of grow into at the NBA level. He's confident with the ball in his hands. At South Dakota State, he used to run the entire show. Creighton was a little bit of an adjustment period for him, but still at his best, the ball was in his hands, making plays for others, which is something I think Detroit could use off the bench as a wing type player. And you're going to notice a lot of wings on this list. Leonard Miller, G League Ignite alum. Last year, I just could not take him seriously as a draft prospect. He has done a good amount of work figuring out what his role should be. A lot of people thought he would kind of play a more point forward role, and he's turned into more of this like lengthy, athletic, rebounding wing type, which fits kind of what Detroit would maybe be looking for when it comes to building some team defense and putting athleticism and length on the wing. Maxwell Lewis, decent shooter. I don't love his game, to be honest with you, out of Pepperdine. He's not pictured on the graphic. If I was running Detroit, if I'm Troy Weaver, I'm not taking Maxwell Lewis. I don't think Maxwell Lewis is going to be that great. Now, I hope he is. I hope, for every prospect that I evaluate, that I hope they have great NBA careers, because when it means the NBA is getting more and more talented, there's more guys finding success. And also that, I just want these people to be successful individuals, because I don't want to root against anybody. But a guy who I do really like, Brandon Porzingis from Santa Clara. Now, I'd be shocked if he's actually available in the 2nd round, but I've heard some rumblings that people expect that. I myself do not. I think Brandon Porzingis would be a massive steal in round 2, specifically for Detroit's needs in terms of putting more shooting and a little bit more playmaking feel as well on the wing next to their star young players. Porzingis translates very, very well to the NBA as a dribble, pass, shoot guy. Shot well above 40% from 3 this past year for Santa Clara as a true sophomore. I think he's a very good player. He's from Wisconsin, so he's a Midwest guy as well, would fit right into Detroit. And when we're talking about, locals, Emoni Bates, another option here, went back to Eastern Michigan after a tough freshman year at Memphis, obviously was a year early. Emoni Bates has very, very good movement shooting potential. A lot of people get really split on Emoni Bates. Some people think he's going to be a star. I do not believe that. Some people think he's absolutely terrible because they imagine him having the ball in his hands. If you can picture Emoni Bates playing without the ball as a catch and shoot threat, a guy who's going to run off stagger screens, could pin him down from the corner, could flare him to the corner, whatever you want to do with him, he's going to pull some gravity to him because he's a very, very good movement shooter where he catches, and if he's on balance, is probably going in the hoop. Now, if he's off balance, he's probably missing. So that's something that I hope a shooting coach in the NBA picks up, because it's a serious epidemic for him, that if he is off balance, it's going to brick and brick ugly. But if he's on balance, it's probably a perfect swish. And you say, wow, how did this guy fall in the draft? It's because, people have sometimes issues imagining what a guy can actually look like at the NBA level. I think Emoni Bates could have a nice career if he goes to the right situation. And then we get to NBA free agency, where the Pistons have roughly $47 million in practical cap space this offseason. Plus, they have access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is around $11 million annually. We'll see what the Pistons look to do with that, because the new CBA is going to be kicking in, kind of puts some tighter restrictions, and with the Pistons having so many young guys that at some point they're going to want to lock up on contracts, that $11 million annually might put them a little bit closer to that second tax apron, which I'm going to have a video on at some point. But this team seriously has some wing needs, and like I mentioned in the open, they need seriously good veterans. I think one issue with Detroit, they've locked into guys like Alec Burks, Nerlens Noel, and there's not issues with having those players. They just can't be your 6th and 7th and 8th best players on the roster. They're not good enough to be that. If they're your 9th, 10th, 11th best guys, then you're probably a very good team. I think the Pistons need to make 2 or 3 big impact signings this year. And I'm not necessarily talking about stars. I'm talking about guys who are very, very good in their role and that you can actually trust to play 28 to 35 minutes a game. I just don't believe that Nerlens Noel is that. I'd never have really thought that Alec Burks is that. I think that those guys are more spot minute rotation guys who can be good for a locker room. And there's no harm in getting those players specifically in the fashion that they did from New York last offseason, excuse me. But I still think that they need more. They need more players who fill in higher leverage roles. And this isn't a knock on Troy Weaver. I think outside of drafting Killian Hayes, I think for the most part, he's done a very good job. There's a couple things I would have done differently. You could say that about a lot of other GMs as well. But with what he inherited, I think he's done a good job kind of redirecting this team. Obviously got some help in the lottery, moving up to 1 to get Cade Cunningham as well. But I do think that there was a lot of work to be done. He's moved this team in the right direction. And now having this much money in cap space this offseason really sets you up for success. And you guys know I call it a spade. I call a spade a spade. 2 years ago, I was talking about how I thought Troy Weaver had been doing a terrible job, but over the last couple of years, I think he's made a lot of smart decisions consecutively, which has put this team in a better spot moving forward, which is really, the whole point of my analysis is I feel like I'm very rarely biased. You guys have heard some of the stuff I've said about my, favorite team, the Dallas Mavericks. When I think that they're screwing up, I let it be known that I think they're screwing up. And the Pistons, I think they're on the right track now. And I think that there's some options out here in free agency that I would like for them. So here are some potential additions. Draymond Green of the Golden State Warriors, obviously a Michigan State guy. I think the Pistons, if they had the opportunity to sign him this offseason, we'll see how the playoffs go for Draymond. But, I mean, if this option actually becomes a reality or a potential signing for Detroit, I think this is one you have to jump on. I understand at the point where Draymond's at in his career, this might become a, quote unquote bad signing in terms of his age, traditional statistic production, and, the fact that he won't be playing with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson anymore might make that signing look really bad. But at the same time, they need a player like him who is defensively going to hold people accountable, set an expectation level, and by the way, just be a very good individual and team defender in his own right. Then there's Chris Middleton and Kristaps Porzingis, other guys who are on player options as well. Kristaps Porzingis, Middleton, I'm not exactly certain if they're going to opt into their contracts or not. Middleton, he's got a lot of money this year, but he might want to lock into something a little bit longer term. Funny enough, he was drafted by the Pistons back in his own draft class, and then some people might get excited about this Porzingis Pistons option. Hear me out. They should not do this. They should not make those two signings. Middleton, I just don't think is what they need. Now, I think he would be a nice stability type player for them, but his type of contract, it's just different from the Draymond Green one because he's less of a vocal leader, less of a lead by voice type of guy, which I know most times you want a lead by example type player. And I think Middleton is a very good lead by example player, but I think Draymond Green is as well. And I think that vocal leadership is something Detroit needs just with how young of a team they are. And then for Kristaps Porzingis, I love Kristaps. I think he's a very good player, but I just don't think he's the type of player Detroit needs at this point. I think that they need more facilitation, someone who's going to be a quicker ball mover, someone who's going to be a little bit more versatile defensively. Porzingis is a very good rim protector. He actually had some of the best defensive metrics this year when it comes to defending the rim, something that I think Dallas underexplored when he was there. The Pistons actually had the Wizards had 2 guys in the top 15 this year in blocks, in total blocks, in Porzingis and Gafford. So I think that Porzingis is an underrated defender, but not exactly the type of defender Detroit needs, especially with how many bigs they have on this roster already. They need more wing type defenders, which Draymond Green fits into that a little bit. Also, very smart help guy. So let's take off those 2 big signings, and let's maybe even hit pause on Draymond Green, who I think would be a max-ish type slot player. I'm not sure if he's going to sign for the full max, but there's also some medium to large size contracts that I do think make some sense as well. Kyle Kuzma of the Washington Wizards. I'm sure a lot of Pistons fans are hopeful that they could get a player like him who does fit more of that traditional wing type player. I think he's better as a 4 than a 3, which is a little clunkier in Detroit. I think that Detroit needs more true wings, more guys who can play that 3 position specifically. Gary Trent Jr. is more of a 2 than a 3, as is Dillon Brooks. So the 3 medium to large size contracts I have here are a little bit complicated. And secondly, I think a lot of the teams around the league are going to have interest in these guys. Kuzma is going to be highly coveted, probably sticks around in Washington if I had to guess, just with the way the Wizards are ran. Dillon Brooks probably sticks around in Memphis, but we'll see exactly what the Grizzlies do with the new CBA. I think that's going to be a team that's very impacted by the new legislature in the NBA. And then Gary Trent Jr. is a player who I do think will be on the move. I'm just not sure if it's to Detroit. They're a little guard heavy as well. Like I said, they need more true wings. Trent Jr., somebody who deflects the ball a ton. He gets a ton of steals, and I know a lot of people love steals. It makes people think that he's a very good defender. He does sometimes, and quite frequently, honestly, jeopardize his actual defensive positioning and technique and stance to try and break for a steal. Now, he's very quick-footed. He does a good job staying in front of guys despite being very reach happy, which is a very tough thing to do. And I think if he went to the right coaching staff, and you guys know I like Nick Nurse a lot, but I don't think that Nick Nurse is somebody who requires guys to be lockdown defenders. He encourages tip balls and deflections, and for good reason. It helps their offense, it helps them score. But I think Gary Trent Jr., if he locked in, could be a very, very good individual one-on-one defender. If he were to kind of break some of those habits of reaching, he would average less steals per game, but I think he'd be a better actual on-ball defender. And then for the mid-level exception, there's 3 options I really like here. Joe Ingles, we talked about Baylor Shireman. Why not go get the real thing in Joe Ingles as well from the Milwaukee Bucks? He's had a very nice season for Milwaukee coming off that ACL injury. The Bucks have done a very good job in the last about 8 to 12 months when it comes to investing in older players, because Ingles was a home run signing for them on the non-taxpayer mid-level on the taxpayer mid-level, where they had to go out and get him around $6 million. Definitely Detroit would have the upper hand in going and getting him now with the amount of money they could offer. Otherwise, Jay Crowder is on the last year of his deal after Milwaukee acquired him via trade through that 3-teamer with the Durant, Mikal Bridges saga obviously taking place, opened the possibility of the Bucks landing Jay Crowder. Another home run move for them. And then also Seth Curry. I know a smaller player doesn't necessarily fill some of the defensive needs for Detroit. I think Jay Crowder should be their priority here, but Seth Curry, another floor spacer. I think just, again, more shooting, more defensive prowess. It's not rocket science here. This isn't going to be oh my God, well, we got to get this guy who cuts super well off of the corner. We don't need to get that precise with what Detroit needs. They need veterans, they need defense, they need 3-point shooting. Very clear, concise, and to be honest, the best case scenario, they get another guy who can play make, which is why I like Draymond Green for them quite a bit. But if you're splitting hairs and you're signing guys for the mid-level, you're not going to get someone who does every single thing on the floor. So you have to pick and choose a little bit. Jay Crowder, Seth Curry, Joe Ingles, 3 really good options that I like for the Pistons this year. And when it comes to the best case scenario, this feels a lot like my last offseason preview. So I put the Spider-Man meme here because it just feels like the Pistons and Rockets are in very similar situations. Now I think the Pistons maybe have a clear pathway to winning a lot right away, but at the same time, I think the Rockets have a very clear pathway. Theirs is a little bit more reliant on something happening in Philadelphia, though, whereas Detroit right now, I feel like there's a lot of questions about what their next step is to taking that, move forward. But like I laid out, there's options. So what that best case scenario for Detroit specifically looks like is you luck into the number 1 pick. And again, I say luck because there's an 86% chance for Detroit that they do not move into the number 1 pick, which means you don't get Victor Wembanyama and you're left scratching your head wondering, well, first of all, how are we going to guard this guy in the future? And secondly, what do we do now for our own team building? But if you do, and then you can go out and you're probably an attractive destination then for 2 or 3 or 4 veterans, that fills out your rotation where you go into next year with a core of Duren, Cade, Ivy, Wembanyama. We'll see what happens with James Wiseman and Marvin Bagley. I think at that point they become almost long-term non-factors. You trade them, figure out some stuff, move some money around, that kind of thing. But then if you can add a Jay Crowder or a Joe Ingles, or maybe you are able to sign a Kyle Kuzma or a Dylan Brooks, you're able to, fill out your rotation. Also, shout out to Isaiah Livers, who I think is a guy who's going to stick in the NBA for a while. I think that he would be a nice option. And then if you hit on your second round pick, you're looking at maybe a team that has a 9-man rotation. Now, again, are you going to be able to rely on that second round pick in year 1? Probably not, but we're looking at long term. How do you best build this team? And best case scenario, it all starts with the draft, which is why I'm wearing this shirt right now. Everything starts with this guy. Victor Wembanyama is the best prospect I've ever evaluated. He likely will be the best prospect I ever evaluate in my entire life on earth because he is that special. He is that good. Just think about it again. 7'4". I know some people are going to, be saying stuff. I've seen it on Twitter where people think, well, I think Scoot Henderson's going to be the best. It's possible that their careers play out that way, but no way. If you had the number 1 pick, there's no way you can pass on Victor Wembanyama. He's the number 1 player in the class. He's number 1 player in pretty much any draft class ever. He's incredible. And somebody who you just cannot afford to pass on. And that's where it all starts and ends, honestly, this offseason. So the outlook for next season, it's high variance as of right now. If they get the number 1 pick and they get a whole bunch of these signings to pan out, I like their chances to make a push in the East. I think they could instantly be better than Charlotte. I think they could instantly jump other teams as well. We'll see what happens with Atlanta and Trae Young. Miami looks like they're on a trend downward right now. Now I'm not sure because Pat Riley always finds a way to kind of rejuvenate that team. But what I'm saying is there's opportunity right now. And if James Harden goes back out west to Houston, maybe there's one more team that's opening up. Maybe Joel Embiid requests a trade. And Detroit, they have a lot of assets too. So, who knows? I'm not going to stir the pot too much, but maybe Joel Embiid and Victor Wembanyama are teammates at some point. You never know, right? I don't want to, make things sound too crazy, but there's a lot of ways that Detroit could significantly improve, but there's also still the reality that maybe they fall to 5th in the draft or 4th or 3rd, and you just don't get as high impact of a player as a rookie. You become less attractive as a free agent destination. Because of that, you maybe overpay a guy, and now you're sitting in a hole instead of, wow, this could have played out so much differently if some ping pong balls went our way. Reminder to go check out that video as well, breaking down the draft lottery. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. Again, a lot of work goes into these videos, a lot of background work in terms of making sure I know what teams have which picks and what the money situation looks like. All available free agents, which we'll have a video on very soon as well. So there's a lot of content coming out on the channel. Just make sure to hit the subscribe button. Turn on that notification bell too if you haven't already. That way you don't miss an upload on the channel. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming out. And thank you all so much for watching. I really, really do appreciate each and every one of you taking the time out of the day to listen to me talk about basketball. And I love reading your comments. I read every single comment. So leave something down there for me, whether it's what team you want to see next, your thoughts on this video, maybe your thoughts on some free agents that I missed, or just some generic thoughts as well. I love hearing from you guys. So let me know in the comment section. Thanks again so much, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.